Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to yet another edition of Truth to Power right here on ITV Networks channel 347. My name is Faraz Patel, and for the next 1 hour we have an amazing show for you lined up. Of course, just after 2 o'clock we're going to be talking to Denosa in the Eastern Cape. There have been nurses that have been suspended for not treating a COVID-19 death that happened in King Williamstown. And of course, schools are set to be open on June the 1st. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, how safe is it for our children to go back to school? And so, of course, we'll be delving into that in the final half an hour of Truth to Power. But my first guest is somebody that South Africa knows very, very well. Currently, she is the advocate for the High Court. She is the founder of the Tumor Foundation, but you know her very well as the former Public Protector of South Africa. It is Advocate and Professor Thuli Madonsela. Professor, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us here on Truth to Power.
Good afternoon, Faraz. Thank you for the privilege, and good afternoon to the viewers.
No, it's an absolute privilege to have somebody of your stature, Professor. Professor, of course, let's talk about the current pandemic that is, of course, occurring right now in South Africa. How important is social justice during a time like this where freedom of movement has been restricted for so many citizens of South Africa?
Social justice has never been as important as it is today because freedom of movement has been restricted for everyone. However, the impact is more severe on those in society who already exist in the margins. For example, if you say everyone can now only order hot food, it's going to be those who are not on the net that are going to have problems.
Professor, I want to talk about government's response to its citizens in terms of the lockdown and how the government of South Africa has dealt with its citizens during this pandemic at this moment.
Well, firstly, I would like to thank the government for reacting promptly and putting us up there among the most responsive governments in the world. And I don't want to suggest that anything government has done has malice in it. I think government has done exceptionally well. It's inadequate differentiation that has been the problem. It's that when you do policy planning, you should ask yourself, how will this affect the grandmothers? How will it affect children? How will it affect rich people, poor people, rural people, township people? I think there was inadequate attention paid to that. The other key problem is that the problem was viewed in a binary way, as if it's a matter between life and the economy, or life and livelihoods, as they normally put it. And that's wrong. It's life, livelihoods, and social well-being.
Professor, I think a lot of people, especially the World Health Organization, has praised the way President Cyril Ramaphosa has dealt with the situation. We have other leaders who have kind of just pushed the pandemic to the side, or have made reckless comments in the media. So how important is it to have the right sort of leadership in guiding the country through this pandemic?
It's extremely important. The commendation that President Ramaphosa got from the World Health Organization was well deserved. As I said earlier, government in its entirety, not just the president, his ministers, have done well to respond as speedily as possible and as decisively as necessary to the pandemic. That said, though, you need the right leadership, but you need collaborative government. Right leadership alone is not enough, because if government doesn't pull in as diverse expertise as necessary, you get your decisions made by doctors and economists. They don't know about funerals. Right now, do you know that your mother-in-law cannot come to your funeral if you died? So an economist would not know that, neither would a doctor. You would need social scientists to be part of the decision-making, to understand the social impact of some of these decisions.
And on the topic, Professor, I mean, we've seen Dr. Zweli Mkhize rope in a lot of these scientists, epidemiologists, especially Professor Salim Abdul Karim, who's of course come to the party to assist government in this response. So the importance, obviously, and how vital is it in terms of getting these external stakeholders to come in and assist government, especially in its healthcare?
It's very important. In Zulu, we say the best loincloth is the one that is sewn in public. Unlike the Western approach that says too many cooks spoil the broth. But that said, obviously, you have to be very discerning in what help do you get. And secondly, you have to exhaust internal resources first before you get external resources.
Professor, President Cyril Ramaphosa this week met with a lot of religious leaders about the potential reopening of places of worship. There's been a lot of external negotiations, internal negotiations that have been happening. And President Ramaphosa, in his weekly newsletter, was very open in saying that religious leaders or any other external stakeholders constitutionally have the right to approach the courts. So the role in terms of these external stakeholders in making sure that they can communicate with the president, how important is that, especially in a democratic nation?
It is extremely important that all role players or all key stakeholders are represented in the decision making. And it was a mistake that at the beginning, the president met with religious leaders, traditional leaders, etc. But in the middle, things got messy and these groupings were excluded. But there was nothing wrong with closing places of worship temporarily. I think what the president should have done, though, would have been to allow religious leaders to be essential services, because most people I know don't call a social worker or a psychologist when they are battling with emotions, mental health, etc. They call their pastor or somebody from their church group.
Professor, we've seen a lot of images on various media outlets of the poor and the vulnerable that are really suffering, especially in the townships and especially in the rural areas. And I think food parcels has become part and parcel of assisting them, but also healthcare in making sure that the townships where social distancing isn't the easiest sort of way of practicing. So how important is it for government, NGOs, NPOs to get involved in making sure that the poor and the vulnerable are mostly protected during these difficult times?
It is extremely important. Even the Disaster Management Act envisages that if you're going to have a disaster, your key troops will come from volunteers. And I think NGOs make that kind of constituency, and no government can ever do things alone. And I think government has acknowledged that NGOs are an important part, and would like to thank organizations such as the Gift of the Givers, the Islamic Community, Mbumba Foundation, Mandela Foundation, and that are at the forefront there, making sure that they supplement whatever government is doing and whatever business is doing to make sure no one is left behind. But that said, there must be coordination of these services, because there's a risk of over-servicing and under-servicing. There are communities that have not been reached. The Tuma Foundation has been doing a lot of work in linking people to services, but our concern is that those that are left behind are increasingly getting desperate and angry.
Professor, I want to speak about the security of our country. I know it's come under a lot of spotlight, and I want to obviously discuss the SANDF case that happened about a few weeks ago, where there was allegations that one of the soldiers had beat a man to death, Colin Scorza in Alexandra. Looking at security now, is this the sort of wake-up call that the South African Police Service and the SANDF needed in order to make sure that they need to treat each and every citizen with the sort of respect they deserve? And I know it's very sad because it had resulted in a death that had happened. But how important is it that security, especially the army who has been roped into various areas in South Africa, play a massive role in making sure that rights, human rights especially, is not violated in a time like this?
Absolutely. The death in the Khosa family is sad and regrettable, but you're right that it is the turning point, the moment that has made government sit, listen, and do something. I remember very early in the process saying that government should appoint a person to oversee the work of the security forces. Because in instances like this, there are people who have their own personal insecurities, and when they get little power, they abuse it. We know that. We studied that in our human rights course, that some of the very insecure human beings are drawn to the security forces. Brutality during apartheid was not only because it was authorized by government, a lot of it had to do with the fact that people who had failed in their own lives ended up being thrown to the security forces. And it's important that government takes a very unambiguous stand about the observance and the protection of human rights when we unleash security forces to the townships. And you can see that they've targeted the poor, or at least the lower middle class. We haven't heard about their excesses in the suburbs or in the historically advantaged communities. They're targeting the most vulnerable and invading their homes. And thank God that the courts have been very clear about that. They told government what we've been telling government. These people need to be properly taught to behave the way they would have behaved if they were a peacekeeping force. Because the government is not at war with us as a people, and we're not at war with the government. The government and us, the people of the world, our governments and us, the people of the world, are at war with a virus called the coronavirus, COVID-19.
Professor, on that topic, I've been speaking to a lot of fellow citizens that have been saying that they've kind of felt violated by the lockdown. Now, of course, if you speak to business people, they'll have the same sort of aspect with regards to that topic, is that obviously businesses have been affected. And of course, government has roped in the Solidarity Fund to help businesses, especially SMMEs. But would you say it's a fair assessment that citizens feel violated, or do we as the public need to, for once, at least say, let's respect authority, let's work with government in making sure that this virus can be curbed and that we can have a future beyond COVID-19?
Well, the answer is both. People do feel violated, and also people must obey government. People feel violated because it's called comfort to say to a person who is a small business person in a small neighborhood, it's okay, make a sacrifice for the whole nation. When you know that the big supermarkets are making a killing out of this, those who are on the net are making a killing out of this. The industries that were allowed to operate during COVID-19 are making a killing. That said, I'm not suggesting that if you have one child that is sick, then you should kill all of your children. I think the approach that I am making is that the businesses that thrived during COVID-19, the ones that were allowed to operate, will have to do more than provide loans to the ones that were not allowed to operate. The businesses that were allowed to operate will have to pay some kind of tax as their own sacrifice, because they benefited from the rest of society having to stay at home. And it was right for government to make some of us stay at home. But there has to be a balance between those who benefit and those who sacrificed.
Professor, one final question. A lot of people know you for obviously the state capture report, which has really impacted South Africa in terms of how finally a lot of people could see that the judiciary is doing its work. But how important is it in terms of, obviously we have the Zondo Commission that's currently going on, and of course will resume after COVID-19 when obviously social distancing is a thing of the past. But how important was the report that you developed with regards to the state capture and of course the capturing of South Africa with regards to the Gupta family and other stakeholders? How important is it in making sure that the three arms of the state, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, are protected from outside sources and that government does not go through these problems again?
It's extremely important that no government should be captured by a small minority. Democracy is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. And in a democracy, all of us are governing, but because not all of us can govern at the same time, we do representative government by electing those among us that we consider to be the most competent, least selfish, and not personally conflicted. And we get them to do things. When the state is captured, there's no democracy because the will of the people is subverted by the will of a nefarious few who capture the state for personal gain. They redirect the policies of the state, they redirect the procurement policies of the state, and in the end, you risk having a failed state. We're still battling with a hollowed out state where people were not appointed because of their competence, but a lot of them were appointed because of their pliability. And here we are facing a very difficult challenge of COVID-19 and a challenged economy. You need the most competent amongst us, but you also need those who will obey the Constitution, pursue common good, and make sure that this country is able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state among nations, which is what the Constitution hoped for this country. But more than anything else, state capture undermines social justice and equality because you get a few having their will being done instead of having the will of the people being done.
Professor Thuli Madonsela, it has been an absolute pleasure having someone of your stature on our show. It was really an engaging and insightful conversation, and hopefully we can have this definitely again in the future outside of COVID-19, discussing the way forward with regards to our nation.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
An absolute privilege for us also. There we go. Professor and Advocate Thuli Madonsela, of course, the advocate for the High Court, the founder of the Tuma Foundation, and the former public protector. So, after the break, we're going to be discussing an incident that happened in the Eastern Cape. 5 nurses who were suspended due to a COVID-19 death in Grey Hospital in King Williamstown. We'll be talking to Kaya Sodidi, who is, of course, the DENOSA Secretary General. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Truth to Power. Now, in the Eastern Cape, 5 nurses were suspended due to a COVID-19 death that occurred at the Grey Hospital in King Williamstown. This, of course, 1 week after International Nurses Day occurred. Now, to discuss this matter with regards to the way going forward, I am joined by DENOSA Secretary General in the Eastern Cape, Kaya Sodidi. Kaya, good afternoon and welcome to Truth to Power.
Good afternoon to you and to the viewers.
Kaya, I just want to get a bit of a background to what had happened at Grey Hospital in King Williamstown.
What happened is that there was a patient which was from one of the local hospitals, which was referred to Grey Hospital with suspected COVID-19. But that hospital, this one hospital, doesn't have the capacity. Then they referred the patient to Grey Hospital. So when you go to Grey Hospital, the patient was attended to, but unfortunately, because of there were strong signs of having COVID-19 or coronavirus, then the nurses were looking for equipment so that they can attend to the patient. And however, when they're looking for the equipment, there was nothing, what is called the personal protective equipment, PPE. There's none of that so that they can attend to the patient. So that's what happened. And then after that, when the patient, when the nurses were looking for equipment, looking for the management, then the management brought the equipment. But it was too late for the patient. The patient was already now having difficulties and ended up now dying while the nurses were busy now trying to assist after the equipment was made available by the management.
Was there ever consultation with the Eastern Cape Health, MEC for Health, with regards to this?
Yes, we did. We did call the head of department to inform them that we are not happy in the manner they've handled this matter. Was number one, what we see as Genosa is that the nurses they've become soft targets, or they've become victims in the situation which was what was not their own making. Because, for example, the management has been holding the working equipment in the stores because the nurses, when they're looking for the equipment, there was nothing. Only afterwards it's available. So the management didn't make the equipment available for the nurses to work. That's what we raised with the Department of Health, which means that the head of the department and MEC. Number two is the fact that the other people were involved, like the doctor, the medical doctor, who was part of the team which has been suspended in that shift. And that doctor has not been suspended, and nothing happened to the doctor. So that's what we raised with the Department of Health and with the head of the department as well.
Kaya, it sounds as if the Eastern Cape Health Department just kind of seems as if they're not prepared for this. Would you say that it's a fair statement to say that they are not ready to deal with this pandemic, even though last week Dr. Zweli Mkhize and President Cyril Ramaphosa visited the province?
Yes, of course. That's what we said in the early days of the pandemic, of the coronavirus, that as Eastern Cape, as the Northern Eastern Cape, we're not convinced that the department was ready to face the outbreak of coronavirus because of the situation of our health system in terms of shortage of staff, lack of working equipment, even before the PPE became fashionable. The ordinary working equipment in our hospital has been a problem. And then it's such that has been not, for many years we've been raising these things that our health system is not in good shape. So the coronavirus or the pandemic has got us off that, has got us our health system in the Eastern Cape not up to scratch.
Here's another question, Kaya, for you. I mean, we speak about nurses, we speak about, obviously last week was International Nurses Day and the importance of them as frontline workers. But by the sounds of this, it seems as if they are being made the scapegoats with regards to the incident that has happened in King Williamstown. Would that be a fair assessment?
No, it is correct. That is what's happening. Indeed, we were supposed to be celebrating International Nurses Day last week, but we did celebrate it under, or in fact, we did commemorate it under this dark cloud that the nurses are facing and the health system at large. When we meet on these days of the International Nurses Day, we remind each other as nurses of the pledge we took, and then we also highlight the plight and the difficulties we are having in the health system. So unfortunately, last week we could not do that in the manner we wanted to, which is now what is happening now in the nurses, to the nurses, in particular what happened in the Eastern Cape Hospital, is proving that nurses really are working under difficulties where they are not being supported, they are not enjoying the support by the management and by the department. So that is how we view this whole thing, that the nurses are the scapegoats indeed, are made scapegoats, and then they are not enjoying the support of the management and of the department. They are still being targeted and victimized if something goes wrong or if the health system experiences problems. First nurses, the nurses are the first as frontliners to bear the brunt of all the problems of the health system in our province.
Kaya, I would like to ask, are proper health measures being taken place in order to make sure that there's safety for these frontline workers? Because by the sounds of it, they've just been put in there and there's no safety measures in order to make or in order to protect them from patients who are, of course, tested positive for COVID-19.
Yes, the COVID-19, like we said, as the COVID-19 arrived when our health system in any way was in shambles. Because the reason I'm saying that the nurses, there's been a lack of security, proper security to protect nurses at work. That's number one. So the nurses have been exposed in many sorts of things, being a crime, being robbed at work, and other things. So the issue of COVID-19 and the lack of working equipment during this period is just an addition of the things that have been permanently in place. And unfortunately, the department is again showing that it's failing to protect its frontliners or the workers to work or to face the pandemic. Over and above the lack of security we've been crying for many years.
Kaya, one final question. What is DENOSA's plan in terms of making sure that they can overturn the suspension of these nurses?
No, what we have done, like we said earlier on in this interview, that we have approached the department showing our dissatisfaction in the manner this matter has been handled. They've given us a platform. There was a meeting this morning whereby we met with the department, with the delegation of the department, and then they told us, we agreed that on Monday, the nurses must come back to work, was this unfair suspension. In fact, this suspension now is becoming unfair labor practice in the manner it has been done. So Monday, they're going back to work. Otherwise, what we're planning is that if they could not agree on them coming back, we're going to take further steps of legal action by approaching labor court to force the department to reinstate the nurses.
Kayo Sadidi, the DENOSA Secretary General in the Eastern Cape, thank you so much for making time for us, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Well, there we go. There's Kayo Sadidi from DENOSA, and I tell you what, we need all our frontline workers in each and every medical facility to make sure that COVID-19 can be combated. So hopefully those 5 nurses can return back to work, especially in an economy that we are in right now where unemployment seems to be going deeper and much deeper. Well, coming up after the break, of course, earlier on this week, Minister for Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, has announced that schools will reopen on June the 1st. But the question is, at what cost? Stay tuned. I tell you, we are not leaving your screens as yet. Welcome back to Truth to Power. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, of course, earlier on in this week, Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, had announced that grade 7s and grade 12s were allowed to go back to school from June the 1st. Do remember that we are still in current lockdown level 4, and the potential to moving to level 3 could happen. The only thing is, the virus is yet to peak in South Africa, and of course the winter season will be coming full swing in June. So the question is it worth sending the pupils to school? Joining me on the line, I have the president of NAPTOSA, Basil Manuel, to discuss the way going forward. Basil, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on Truth to Power.
Good afternoon, pleasure to be with you.
Basil, I just wanted to get NAPTOSA's comment with regards to the reopening of schools.
Well, look, we've never had a problem with the date. However, we've had a problem with what informs the date. And that has been the big issue. So what we're asking is, what made the minister make that choice of date? Because we ourselves have done a survey. We've checked with our members, we've checked with the broader teaching fraternity, and we discover that, in fact, those assurances the minister gave are not holding water. And that is our problem at the moment, is that there's a big disjuncture between what we have found out and what the minister said to the people in the country in terms of the readiness to reopen schools.
Basil, will NAPTOSA and other unions continually be consulting with the Department of Basic Education? And I think one of the most important points about this is the protection of pupils and teachers and the rest of the staff within the schools that are going to be, of course, catering for grade 7 and grade 12s?
Yes, of course. Look, it is part of our work that we consult regularly with the minister. But I don't want to create the impression that consultation means agreement. And we've been consulted on these matters throughout. However, we haven't necessarily agreed. And we don't agree that the schools are ready. We don't see, even today, that PPEs have been delivered to the majority of schools. We don't see that the environment is safe for teachers to return, let alone the learners, let alone the other essential workers in the school that are responsible for keeping the schools clean and tidy. So there are many, many issues that haven't been attended to, and that is the basis of our concern.
Basil, and on that topic, of course, you know, the testing and the continuous testing of pupils and teachers, has the Department of Basic Education consulted with the unions and the Department of Health in making sure that continuous testing is done in the schools? Because if there is one case of a positive case of COVID-19 in one school, that means the entire school needs to shut down. Is that something the Department of Basic Education has taken into context?
Absolutely. And remember, it's not about testing in the schools, it's about screening. So the schools have to have people appointed to screen. It's not the responsibility of teachers to screen. These must be people who have some training. And should there then be an instance where somebody's temperature is out of kilter with what is normal, that person is sent to a testing center. Now, this is part of the problem. Some provinces don't even have the screening thermometers. And a case in point is of course the Northwest and Limpopo. And some provinces haven't appointed screeners. And this is what sets us up and makes us worry. Remember, as teachers, we are not general workers where the product is not necessarily our concern. Yeah, the product is our concern because these are our children. And teachers never speak about the children. We always talk about our children because we have a responsibility of care for those. So whilst we are interested in the teacher, we are equally interested in the child.
Basil, of course, the virus is set to peak in South Africa around the winter times, which is of course known as the flu season. What are the fears as the unions that the welfare of teachers and pupils will be put at risk when they do go back to school?
Well, that is the big unknown. And as much as we are being given assurances by our scientists that children are less vulnerable than the adults, remember that the teachers are all adults and many teachers have morbidities. And we are very, very concerned that given the double whammy of winter together with the virus, that we may see an unimaginable spike. And remember that even though we are saying children are not the most vulnerable, our children in the high schools are also adults themselves, and they too could be more vulnerable. So we are very, very concerned, and this is the basis of the teacher concerns.
Basil, I'm speaking to a lot of parents, and I'm not so sure whether you are a parent yourself, but every single parent that I speak to, it's a case of we are afraid of sending our children. Surely you can understand from their point of view, and also teachers. I mean, I know of a lot of teachers themselves who are just fearing the 1st of June. Surely this is some sort of a justification from them that they are in a state of fear that when they do go to school, there are chances that they could pick up this virus.
Absolutely. And as a parent myself, and of course, speaking to many, many parents who contact us, even though we are a teacher union, I can understand the fears. Now, there are two levels that I really believe the department could have done better on. The one is communication. And even if we have a story that is not all that pleasant to tell, let's bring the parents into our confidence. If we had done a better job at communication, maybe our parents wouldn't have been as fearful as they are now. But given the state of it now, I don't blame parents for being concerned. What I'm saying to parents is educate yourself, speak to people who know, and make a rational decision. Because on the other side of the coin of not sending your child back to school is equally daunting. Can you manage to homeschool? Do you have the resources, or do you have the ability to? And these are things that you have to think of. It cannot be an off-the-cuff decision. So parents have a lot of deep thinking to do.
One final question, Basil. A lot of people have been saying that the schooling calendar should have been scrapped off. As a union, would you say that is a fair assessment, or is the education of children, even during a pandemic, that important also at the same time?
I've never believed that we should scrap the school calendar. Neither have I believed that we must try and save the academic year. We must save learning. And that's a very big difference. And for me, we can't make the year pass without the children having learned something. And we need to do proper adjustments so that we save learning for every child. From grade 1 right up to matric. And that has been the thrust of NAPTOSA from the beginning to the end.
Basil Manuel, the president of NAPTOSA, thank you so much for making time for us. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well, there we go. Of course, NAPTOSA making it clear that there has to be concerns with regards to the return to schools. Of course, we did hear early on in this week Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, saying that schools will reopen on June the 1st, grade 7s and grade 12s. But the question is, will there be enough screening done? What about the rural areas and the townships? Are there enough PPEs to make sure that when the pupils do return to school, they are protected? And I think that is the most important factor with regards to that. So the question is, when schools do reopen, what is the way forward with regards to that? Of course, this has been another edition of Truth to Power. The first half an hour we had the former public protector and, of course, the advocate for the High Court, Professor Thuli Madonsela, talking social justice and, of course, how it is so important in South Africa during COVID-19. Then we spoke to, of course, Denosa with regards to 5 nurses that have been suspended in the Eastern Cape. According to Denosa in Eastern Cape, they will be returning to work on Monday at Grey Hospital in King Williamstown to go ahead and fight the pandemic. They are our frontline workers, and we do need our nurses in every single sphere in making sure that we can fight this pandemic. And of course, we ended it off with the president of NAPTOSA getting the union's view with regards to the reopening of schools. This has been Truth to Power with myself, Faraz Patel, and from the rest of our production team, it has been an absolute pleasure hosting you on this Friday afternoon. Stay tuned to ITV Networks for more content, and of course stay tuned as we will have another edition of Truth to Power for you. Good afternoon, enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.